Hello, everybody. How are you?
Good.
Good. Thank you for joining us. We'll go ahead and get started, and we may have a few other attendees come in and trickle in, but thank you for attending our roundtable today, and I want to thank Chris Lee and Sharla Hanaoka and ACM UH West Oahu for making the event possible. So thank you so much. And so let me give a little bit of background just briefly about what we're doing here. We have three distinguished artists who have come to Hawaii as part of NETPAC USA. As you can see from the slide there, NETPAC USA is the network for the promotion of Pacific Island and Asian cinema, United States of America. This organization exists to promote an understanding and appreciation of Asia and Pacific Island cultures through cinema. Because of Hawaii's strong connections to the diverse cultures of Asia and the Pacific, the population embraced opportunities to see films from these places, as proven by the growing popularity of the Hawaii International Film Festival, HIF, which started in 1981. For this reason, Hawaii became the perfect place to establish NETPAC USA, encouraging the screening and appreciation of films made by Asians and Pacific Islanders in order to better understand one another. And so that's from the NETPAC website. This is the organization that is meeting here in Hawaii during this time, and through the efforts of Chris Lee and ACM, we've been able to have these folks come out and speak with us here at UH West Oahu. So I didn't introduce myself at first. I think I know most of you in here. I'm Stan Orr from the Humanities Division and English Concentration, and a good many of the audience here, of course, are my distinguished scholars in the literature and film class. So thank you for coming. We appreciate it. So I'll introduce each of the speakers, and I also wanted to just read a very brief bio, and then we'll turn to our discussion. So our first speaker here is Xia Fei, the professor and vice president of the Beijing Film Academy in China, and this is from the bio that I sent to most of you. Born in 1942, Xia Fei graduated from the Beijing Film Academy in 1965, and today he is professor, dean of the director division, and vice president of the Beijing Film Academy. He's taught many fifth-generation Chinese filmmakers, including Zhang Yimou with Raise the Red Lantern and other films that some of you may know. His film Black Snow won the Silver Bear Award for Personal Achievement at the Berlin Film Festival in 1989, where he later won the Golden Bear Award for Sesame Oil Woman in 1992. 3 years later, his movie A Mongolian Tale won Best Director at the Montreal Film Festival. And that's just a quick, very superficial summary of his many achievements. So thank you for joining us. And I wanted to add, this is Dr. Yu, Patricia Yu, from the Social Science Division. She's an economist who has graciously joined us to help with translation. So thank you, Patricia, for joining us. We appreciate it. Thank you. And our next speaker is, at the end here, is Nick De Ocampo, filmmaker and film historian from the Philippines. He is a prize-winning filmmaker, scholar, and professorial lecturer at the College of Mass Communication at the University of the Philippines. He received his Master of Arts degree in Cinema Studies at the New York University, his certificate in film as a French government scholar in Paris, France, and his A.B. in Theater Arts from the University of the Philippines. Mr. De Ocampo has won numerous awards for his gritty documentaries and personal films depicting modern Filipino society. He's written and published several books on cinema, and he served as a jury member in more than 30 international and Philippine film festivals. So I sent out a link so you could screen his film, Cross Currents. To many of you, at least I got that link to. So thank you for joining us. Appreciate it. And also we're happy to have Hassan Elahi, interdisciplinary media artist, originally from Bangladesh and raised in New York City. He's currently an associate professor at the University of Maryland as the Distinguished Faculty Fellow in Design, Cultures, and Creativity in the Honors College. He's the former director of the Digital Cultures and Creativity Honors Program at that university, and he's taught at San Jose State University, Rutgers, University of South Florida in Tampa, West Virginia University, and he's also taught in New Zealand and in Texas. So let me, in a minute I'll bring back Hassan's website, which we'll talk about, which is an amazing multimedia work that is foregrounding West Oahu at the moment because it's zeroing in on him here at West Oahu. So we'll come back to that. So thank you for joining us also, each of you. What I thought I would do then is go through a couple questions for each person, and I have these little slides that I will have on hand while we're speaking. And I kind of came up with some questions that are very loose and just very kind of general prompts to kind of connect the work of these artists to some of our concerns in our literature and film course. And yet I don't want these to be confining questions at all. Please speak to them in any way you would like. And so we'll go through each question. Each person could take about 15 minutes or so to respond. And then when we're done, we'll open up the floor to the group and conclude that way. So thank you so much. Thank you for your patience with my questions that I sent out. So our first question is for Xie, and this one reads, our literature and film group has been exploring the relationship between the literary picaresque genre and road movies, narratives that often treat the movement of disempowered people through space and or social hierarchies. Your films often dramatize the struggles of marginalized people within and against larger communities. For our purposes, the film Black Snow in particular resonates with the picaresque movement around and the attempt to move up in society. But A Girl from Hunan, A Mongolian Tale, and Woman Sesame Oil Maker might also address these ideas. So could you comment on this idea of the attempt to move around and up in your films? Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Stanley. Hi, my name is Xie Fei. I'm from China. My honor come to here and today give a speech here. I want to speak Chinese, and you can help me.
Yes.
这个因为我的电影多数都改编自小说，所以那个电影跟文学关系非常密切。
Most of my films are adapted from the novel, so there's a strong relationship between the movie and the literature.
至于公路电影，就是在中国是没有出现的很少，是因为我们中国最近20-30年才进入汽车时代。
It's very rare for the road movie to appear in Chinese history because the automobile only appeared in China industry in the recent 2 decades or 3 decades.
还有流浪汉呢，在中国在20年前也不多，因为那时候中国人不许随便走的，农村你也不能随便到城市里来的。
The homeless people are very rare in China because they do not allow the homeless people to roam on the streets and not allow them to move from a countryside to the city.
但是呢，就是我的这几个电影确实也都是在写人在这个社会中间怎么寻找自己的位置。
And a few of my films are talking about how people position themselves in the society and in this transition.
特别这个 Black Snow 这个男孩子，父母都死了，自己在了监狱里住了几年回来，他希望在这个找到自己的一个家。
This guy, the protagonist in this Black Snow, he returned back from the prison and he tried to find his position in the society.
但是非常困难，因为社会不接受他。
But it is very hard for him because the society doesn't want to accept him.
所以我的几个电影，包括这个《Girl from Hunan》是写的100年前的一个童养媳的故事。
This movie, A Girl from Hunan, is talking about the story in China 100 years ago about a girl that was married when she was young.
所以我的几个电影在社会生活中，很多人是被迫去流浪，被迫去寻找的。
Many people in my movies are forced to be homeless, to be forced to seek his position in the society.
所以他们实际是在被嫁到，像这个，她12岁被嫁过去，那丈夫只有2岁，所以很奇怪的封建婚姻的中间，她怎么去寻找自己的位置？
This girl, when she was 12 years old, she was forced to marry with a 2-year-old son in a family. So this is kind of a very weird story about her, how to find her position in the society.
那个 Black Snow 的那个男孩子呢，20多岁，但是他是属于我是被曾经在监狱劳教了，出来以后父母又不在，我怎么去找到一个正常人的生活
？The protagonist in the Black Snow, he returned back to the society from the prison, and he was only 20 years old, so it was very hard for him to try to adjust to a fast-changing society.
所以，我觉得我拍电影呢，就其实表现人，不管他是不个流浪汉还是有工作的，但是他们都是要在这个人生中去寻找自己的价值和位置，他的爱在哪里，他的责任在哪里。
No matter whether this guy is homeless or he has a job, my position is trying to, find out the people how to find their value, how to find their responsibility in the society.
但是，电影嘛，因为主要从视觉和声音来表现的，所以公路电影它会走很多地方，有很多的空间，这会使电影很好看。
The road movie is based on a lot of visual and a lot of audio perspectives. So the road movies actually will film in a lot of places and a lot of spaces, which will make the movie very pretty.
所以像这个《Girl from 湖南》，我是排了4个季节，那个湖南的农村里4个季节，色彩，种的庄稼变化非常漂亮，这样才能够把这个人在这个环境中间去寻找，去表现出来。
The Girl from Hunan was filmed among 4 seasons, and in the countryside, the crops, the color changes drastically. So the color and actually make the stories very drastic, very.
而那个 Black Snow 是城市电影呢，我就是把老的，就是在80到90年代中国从过去社会主义计划经济向市场经济转变这个过程中，新旧2个阶层、2个社会，尽量把它都对比表现出来。
The Black Snow actually was taking a story in the 1980s where the China's economy was transitioning from the planned economy to the capitalist economy. So this story is actually talking about how the people actually adjust their values between these 2 transitions between.
所以我选择的这个文学作品呢，这个人物和故事都是这个作家通过小说先写出来的，但是我把它转到电影上来呢，同样是在表现这个人的这个精神上的寻找，但是我要用视觉、听觉，2个形式来表现。
Actually, my movie was written first by a novelist, but I transitioned the novel to a movie and using the oral and the visual to try to reveal the protagonist's spiritual seeking.
非常高兴这次我的这几个电影。今天和明天都是在夏威夷大学另外一个地方在演，所以希望将来在座的你们有机会也看到这个片子，然后我们还可以，你就会知道一些事情。
It was my pleasure to talk here, and actually my movie will be play in other campuses in UH system, and I hope you guys can have this chance to watch the movie, and later on we'll have more discussions about it.
但是我觉得，无论是文学还是我电影，就是在表现人是流浪还是不流浪，但是他在寻找自己的价值。
Actually, the literature and the movies I focus on is talking about no matter this guy is homeless or not homeless, and how they position themselves in society, how to seek their values.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. That's such illuminating commentary and certainly very relevant for what the students have been studying. And I did make a link available to the film. It's unfortunately that one's not subtitled, but we were talking about other ways for the students to screen your film. So thank you again. We appreciate it. Do jot down your questions or remember them for the different speakers here, and we'll come back to some of these issues during our general discussion time. So thank you again, and I'd like to pose a question to Nick Del Campo. Your films and research have often addressed motifs and implications of travel and transformation. In Memories of Old Manila, for example, the historian who's the protagonist journeys through time and space in the city experiencing dramatic revelations. Your more recent film, Cross Currents, on the other hand, takes viewers on a journey through Asia that might, from my perspective at least, transcend our idea of travel logs, traditional travel logs. Do you feel that there's an essential connection between travel and transformation in your work? Thank you.
Yeah, there's a clear connection, no doubt. But the important thing is, making the connection between literature and cinema. And to a certain point, the notion of travel derives a lot of its inspiration from a literary device, which we may call possibly as allegory. So you see in my film Memories of Old Manila, the one that you see here, that a historian travels through time. And the travel, not a road movie at all, but rather a travel through time, is a travel through history. So what you see here in this 26-minute film, which was produced by Channel 4 London, you see a character molded in the person of a historian, compressing 500 years of our experience under colonization. And how do you encode? Here's the challenge for the filmmaker, as it would be a challenge for a writer. How do you encode 500 years of your recorded history into 26 minutes? You just cannot opt for a linear narrative, but rather your notion of space and time have got to be changed as well. So the beauty of cinema is that through a shot and through the employment of a cut, you can compress space and time. Through your use of mise-en-scène, wherein an image can speak 1,000 words, much more than, I guess, literature. You have here the encoding that I feel goes far beyond what literature can possibly afford to give you. But the important thing, as I said, the inspiration that prompted me to do this is really this travel through time must really be seen as allegory. And this allegory is, as you will know in literature, one thing represents another without necessarily the use of like or as. So that a chair is a throne is a symbol of authority. Authority is abstract, but a chair can represent that sense of monarchic authority. And therefore, we filmmakers have to make use of symbols, imagistic symbols. And one very interesting panel we had in NETPAC is really the use of film language, wherein there was a great debate between linguistic oral language, such as that perhaps which you will see encoded in literature, and the film language that will arise in the use of imagistic symbols. And so this whole travel in time, 5 centuries, collapsing the notion of space and thereby collapsing the notion of time, you begin to use symbols that are very rich, layered, and I feel, really need to be experienced in terms of its sight and sound. Which brings me to, you don't have an image? Oh yeah, we've got an image of that. To my documentary. But first of all, before I leave Memories of Old Manila, no matter if it has kinds of works on the convention of documentary, it is fiction, all right? And fiction, we may, really roughly describe it as a factual film about real people in real time, in real place, in real events. Now, I made 2-3 years ago a documentary, in fact, a 6-hour documentary of the environment in Asia. And I will later donate this to your library, to your archive. In fact, this was taken from more than 500 hours of footage. For 3 years, I was commissioned by the Nippon Foundation to travel across Asia right after the terrible tsunami that happened in Japan and the huge flood that happened in Manila, and so many other disasters caused by water. That I traveled in 5 countries, in Thailand, Malaysia, Indonesia, Philippines, and Japan. and worked on this very urgent theme of water problems and our marine resources. Now, I traveled. Now, literally now, I do not have an alter ego or a substitute to travel through time and space. In many of my present films right now, I appear in my movies. One, because I cannot afford an actor, and two, it affords you now, as filmmaker, to speak directly. And this is documentary. Primarily, I'm a documentary filmmaker. Documentary is my cinema of choice. And I was struck by the question that you, and thank you, I begin to realize now that in my corpus of works, the notion of travel, you know, is there for anybody to see as narrative, you know? I wove, and in fact, one of the questions you asked there is that narrative imposed in this travel experience? Or is it the viewer who imposes that meaning? But let me take it from the role of the producer, for the filmmaker, the one who produces the meaning. I produce that narrative, that I'm traveling through space and time in what we call as Asia, imagined as it may be. I mean, what is Asia really? I mean, it's still very contentious to talk about that. And as I travel through this time, instead of a borrowed experience or an endowed experience to a character, it is me going through and meeting shamanic figures. In this film, I am not talking with experts like scientists about climate change. This is not an Al Gore, you know, truth about the environment, about the 1 degree, 2 degrees, what's gonna happen. This is not that Western scientific way of looking. I'm talking to shamans who can read the clouds, who can count the waves. I mean, how much PhD do we need to count the waves? And so suddenly the travel is not a travel through material space, but what I experienced at the northernmost isolated island in the Philippines, up north, it's called Batan Island, you know, was a journey into a spirit world. Wherein earlier than that, the material things that I had, equipment like this, which would cost around $80,000, would fall. Because you're coming in as a low, you know, as an educated New York University educated, you seem to impose and won't believe that, you know, are there spirits? Is he talking to a spirit? There is an original visitor here, you know, we are visitors, an original resident who takes care of the marine resources. You're skeptical until things happen. And therefore, what we had there as allegory is now experience. We have a word for it, danas, experience. So things become experiential for what? For a production of knowledge. And the journey across Asia just gave me this first-hand knowledge that I'm an academic myself, but no academic experience can give you. I was at a loss of things, and how do you encode that experience? How do you encode a spirit, which is unseen? And film is an experience of visibility. So all of these are good to talk about. Thank you, Professor, to have read that into my film. But we go through a travel in time when we live, all right? What struck me so much is when you began to, you ended your question there, or, you know, your critique of my film, that, you know, how does it translate into life and reality? And actually, that's the journey I had from fiction, and our fiction in cinema is very much influenced by literature, into the actual, whatever we mean by the actual world out there. And yet, do we not create narratives? Because I think that's our job as filmmakers, the role of the narrative, and seeing that narrative in that metaphor of a travel, whether space, time, and in fact also a journey through our own consciousness. So all of this, you know, we may be able to unpack in my films, and I would like to, I'm very eager to have a conversation with you later on. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the wonderful gift of the DVDs to our collection.
6 hours.
That will really enhance the collection. Thank you. And I did want to mention, I need to remember to make available to the students and my colleagues too, a reminder that a couple of your films are available through one of our films on demand databases that
Alexander
we have.
Press.
And so ACM has helped bring that resource with some of your films. And so I also have a question for Hassan Elahi. And in a minute here, Hassan, I want to make sure I get back to your website, which I do have a slide for you, or I did. Let's see.
It's there somewhere.
Yeah, it's here. There it is.
There we go.
And it's a nice slide, but it does not compare to your website. Okay. So I want to make sure I get back to your site, which is your work of art. So our literature and film students have recently studied, as we said before, picaresque fictions and road movies that in various ways kind of cohere movement and travel. We saw that the episodic structure of the picaresque presents human life as a series of episodes that make for a kind of school of hard knocks. And then on the other hand, the road movies, especially Hollywood road movies, offer more dramatic forms of travel. What I wanted to ask was, with respect to your multimedia project Tracking Transients, what are the implications of this work for the travel genre? How might this project relate to cinematic or literary travel narrative conventions? Do you build into the artwork a sense of narrative structure, or does the viewer need to bring those things to your work? And I just wanted to mention too that at the nice lunch we had a little bit ago, we were talking about this idea of film versus cinema. And I think cinema is a term, moving pictures, that encompasses all three of your different canons of work, because what we'll see in a minute are definitely moving pictures in a non-traditional way. So I'll let you speak to that. Yeah.
Thank you, Stan. Can you folks hear me okay back there? We good? All right, and thank you so much for making this. Chris, thank you for inviting us and making this and to ACM, and Charla. And Shauna, thank you for your support of NETPAC and getting us here, and among other things. So a couple of things. I guess we should probably just let this run, and you can see what's going on with my project over here. So anyway, we're gonna get it up and running. There we go. So yeah, so you're gonna see this, and you're gonna see, like, on Monday, January 19th, I was at this place in West Oakland. No, sorry, in North Oakland. Alitalia Flight 96, going from Milan to Bilbao. Or you can see that on Friday, January 9th, I bought these frozen Korean things at a grocery store, and that's where I am right now. You see, it kind of looks familiar to you. Does this look kind of, sort of? And then it'll zoom out. It's a self-running thing, and then these are all these, like, there's train stations that come through. There's a whole sequence of food that I've cooked at home on March 10th at 9:02 p.m. And then there's, this is the Bucharest airport in Bucharest, Romania. And then there's all these, like, desolate images. This is actually interesting that two Bucharest images came up back to back. This is at the train station there. Usually they don't come up that frequently. This is in Tampa, Florida in 2003, and December 19th. Saratoga, California, which is where Montalvo in Northern California. And on January 14th, 2007, I used this toilet. And you're going, what? Why? Why do I need to know this? Long story short, shortly after 9/11, I was reported as a terrorist. And basically what had happened is I was flying back from overseas from an exhibition. And you hand your passport over at immigration, and they, usually, I'm in and out of the country so frequently. They're like, yeah, except this time the guy was like, wait a minute. Like, he wouldn't even, like, look up at me. He was completely, like, frozen. And he says, follow me, please. Walks me through a rat maze, and I end up in an INS detention facility, which is really unusual. As a US citizen, you don't get taken in by INS. That doesn't happen. But here I am in this huge room, actually quite the size, maybe a little wider than this, but about as large as this. And there's all these faces from every corner of the earth. And I'm, like, trying to start a conversation with the security guards, or they're not really typical security guards, but they're these, government guards. And I was like, you guys got any idea what I'm doing here? And they're just as confused as I am, because they're like, I'm, like, holding my US passport in my hand, and we're not exactly. And he's like, you're not waiting for an interpreter. It's like, what's going on here? And then, I kid you not, just like the movies, this guy in a dark suit walks straight up to me and goes, I expected you to be older.
Yeah.
And I was like, gee, this is a really unusual greeting. Sorry, I tried to age as quick as I could. What can I help you with? You mind explaining what's going on? And his response was, you have some explaining to do yourself. So he takes me into the back, and the questions start. Where were you? What were you doing on this? Why were you there? Who pays for your trips? All these bits and details. And then literally out of nowhere, the guy goes to me, where were you September 12th? And if most of us we get asked a random date. I mean, how do you remember? I mean, where were you on March 19th? I don't know, but I can look it up for you. So I pull out my old school like Palm M505. Remember, this is in 2002. So I was like, okay, let's see, September 12th, 2002. I paid my storage bill from this time to this time. I met with my grad students at this time to this time. I taught this class from this time. We read like, well, where were you the 11th? Where were you the 19th? Where were you the 23rd? We read about 6 months of my calendar. And at that moment, I mean, the FBI agent questioning me was like, I mean, he's like, and really anyone that talks to me for more than 2 minutes realizes I'm not exactly a terrorist threat. and then he's like, the storage space that you had there, what'd you have in it? It's like, and this is in Tampa, Florida. So it's like, I don't know, winter clothes that I have no use for here, ratty furniture because I'm a pack rat and I can't get rid of stuff, just assorted junk that you would put in a storage. And then he's kind of really confused and looks at me and says, no explosives. And I was like, I am absolutely certain there were no explosives in there. But basically what had happened is he clarified that they had received a report that an Arab man had fled on September 12th who was hoarding explosives in that space. Never mind I'm not Arab, never mind it wasn't the 12th, never mind there were no explosives. But if you see something, say something, even if you kind of just only see it in your head and you make it up. I mean, look, I know the people that reported this in. I mean, I can't really prove it, but I have a pretty good sense of the people that owned the place. Because really, there are only like 3 people that even knew that I had a storage space. But, I could only imagine what's going through there, because this report didn't come like September 13th. This report came like way later, like 6-8 months later, over the summer. And, they're like, oh, who was that guy? Oh, what was his name? Oh, he's got one of them funny names. Oh, if he's got one of the Muslim names, then he must be Arab. And if he's Arab, then he must have explosives. I mean, this is the kind of logic, it sounds kind of ridiculous, and we understand that on an individual basis. I mean, you're going to deal with dumb, ignorant people no matter what. These are not malicious people. They're just dumb, ignorant. But on the other hand, when a country, particularly your own country, takes on that ignorance as the basis for national policy, it gets kind of scary.
Yes.
So I spent the next 6 months of my life justifying every moment of my life to the FBI, telling them like everything. And finally went through like 9 polygraphs and had all these like wires. And if you take polygraphs, it's not like the movies. It's not like the buzzes, and it's like it's like this guy sitting back there in his office cubicle, and it sounds like Hal. He's like, "Is today Tuesday?" And he's got these like really like totally monotonous voice, no emotion whatsoever. And then so at the end of like 9 of these back to back, he leaves the room. And my regular FBI agent comes back and says, everything's okay. I was like, I know everything's okay, everything's fine. It's like, can you give me a letter saying everything's okay? Yeah. Because all we need is the next guy at the next airport not to get the next memo, and here we go all over. How do I avoid this? And at that moment, of course, I don't know if any of you, in law, I mean, you can't, good luck trying to get a court to say you are not guilty of something you never did. It just doesn't work that way. Our structure just does not work that way. So what I started doing is that moment is I would call the FBI and tell my FBI agent where I was going and what I was doing. And then slowly that turned into phone calls, and then the phone calls turned to emails, and the emails got really, really, really long. Then I'd make websites for him. I'd tell him all sorts of stuff. And then I created this for him. I created this for my FBI agent so he could know exactly where I was at any given moment, and you too. So really what I started doing is like, okay guys, you want to watch me? I'm totally cool with that, but I can watch myself way better than you guys ever could and get such a level of detail that you will never get at, including Chicken Rico. This is, by the way, the most amazing chicken place on Eastern Avenue in Baltimore, or the fact that I'm here right now. It's like I mean, that image really could be anywhere. But since we've all experienced this and we're in this room, we know that this can only be here. That image can only be that location right now. So it hyper-specifies this particular piece. So the arrow is really important because when I first started this project, and this is going back to your question about the road movie, of how location becomes important. Historically, you'd go to the gas station, and you get that map, and you'd unfold it, and then you go, we're here. You would have to locate yourself to the geography, right? You can't even buy those maps anymore. I mean, now it's basically you take out that magic phone and you press that button and you become the center of your geography. So the geography reframes to you. So I think there's a huge difference between body and data body. And this is that shift that starts to take place. And also in a similar way, you know, how you locate yourself to the specificity of it. So when you look at your phones, you know, you look at these data and you look at all these bits and pieces, it's no longer just about the image, but it's also about the metadata that's behind it. And I think that's really the interesting part. And I think there's a couple of really interesting things that's happening here is, you know, like, so when I first started this project, people thought I was crazy. People were like, why would you do this? Why would you tell everybody where you are, where you're going? But really, we're all doing this. We're all doing this, whether we're aware of this or not. And I think this is where it gets really interesting. And I'm really interested in how what was this weird art project is now just completely normal. It's just so in a way, I'm completely obsolete now. So this technology is big. All of you are holding or have in your pockets have devices that are doing this for you. Except now there's a narrative that's added on. And also, and the thing is, in clarifying narrative, I've decided to make this intentionally user unfriendly. So I'm not going to give you this thing in really nice, even packet. It's kind of like how intelligence agencies, they get all these bits and pieces of seemingly unrelated information, and they have to thread this, with that, with that, with that. That's what I'm interested in here, is that you reenacting the role of the FBI agent, and in that reenactment, hopefully there's this realization, wait a minute, this could be me, this could be Aston. So there's a reversal that takes place. So to wrap up in a lot of ways, I look at this work as an act of aggressive compliance and looking at defiance through compliance. And I'm a firm believer, if you go far enough to one end, you'll end up in the other. So this concept of circumnavigation and really talking about narratives and structuring narratives in a way of circumnavigation.
Yeah. Oh, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much, Hassan. And I have to say, this is a very addictive site. When you start to look at this, and it's fascinating. It defamiliarizes all the things that you're looking at, and I have to admit, I wanted on the slide to have one of the pictures of the laboratories you had because it reminded me of Marcel Duchamp in the ready-mades, but I thought it would be kind of off-color, so I did.
There's plenty of those. There's about 1,000 of those on here.
Yeah, it's great though, and so it does, all these, the work of these three artists, they really resonate together, and I appreciate you speaking to your works together and talking about it. So what I'd like to do is, I have many questions for all of you, but I want to open up the floor to the group here and see whether anybody has comments or questions for you. And so, please hold forth, folks out there. Anybody want to start, kick off? I noticed a picture too of my hometown that you had, and that was
What's your
weird.
hometown?
Riverside, California,
Oh, yeah.
Moreno Valley. You
There's
used to go
one,
to UCR at some point.
There's one right there, yeah.
So
That's a town.
I jumped over someone's comment. So, yeah.
This question is for Nick Del Campo. I haven't seen your movies yet, but hopefully I will get to it. And I was just wondering how the idea of time travel came to mind for your film. Traveling through time in like 5 centuries.
Right. The language of cinema affords you that. What is the importance of a cut that happens in editing? And the compression of time that can possibly happen. What is the equivalent of that in literature? Is it a comma? Is it a semicolon? So this is where I think there is a disconnection between literary devices and the temporal notion of cinematic time. And this is very important. So that was a challenge when I had to make a 26-minute film, and I had a grandiose theme of colonization. The Philippines was 2 times colonized by a Western power and 1 time by an Eastern power, which is Japan. World War II, the same time that you were bombed here, in a few hours they were bombing Manila and the entire Philippines. And so the interesting thing is, how can I tell my narrative? So this is an imposition from the author. I had to exercise my authorship. So you're saying, what inspired you to do this? to travel through time. So I put this virus of a character into the flow of time, and yet the time is no longer the time that we know it as it exists now, in reality. This is fiction. The power of a device, as it has proven itself in literature, so is it proving itself, and we have not fully explored the whole power of what devices are available. I'm writing books right now exactly decoding the elements of cinema that make cinema so powerful in the many films that we do. It's amazing to look at Hassan's work and wow, I mean, all this time collapsed into, and in fact, mine is linear time. So I'm just cutting off through the power of editing, making invisible things that happened really in normal time. But Hassan's has now brought us into a beyond the dialogical. It's really a mash-up of time, and he's very digital. I was still very celluloid. So again, analog, if you want to look at it. So what inspired me is history. How do you tell history in compressed time? And I had to resort through a device, and that is the power of the cut.
Yeah. Actually, if I can follow up with that, there's a brilliant story, Borges, about this man trying to draw a map, the same size territory as the map, trying to draw a territory of a map of a territory that's the same size as the territory itself.
Oh.
How do you do that? How do you draw a map a one-to-one scale of a country? And you really, it's this beautiful story, but on a level, I think what we do is we kind of do that, but we do it with time.
Yes.
Instead of doing it with actual physical space. So just a little bit on time in that sense, and the use of time. So, for example, if it takes, say, 12 minutes to walk from this end to way at the other end, we can actually use 12 minutes to show that. Or in those 12 minutes, we go back and forth and we can create that narrative structure that gives us that. So although we can't do that one-to-one in physical space, we can do that across time. So.
Great, good question. Thank you.
Hello. My question is also for Nick Del Campo. Before we talked about the picaresque narrative. Now, in the picaresque novel, in its conception, it is an episodic narrative. Usually, but there are times when in picaresque film, you'll have an episodic narrative in which you have a fade to black, and then you have another episode or another scene, and your work deals with time travel. Now, my kind of question is, first of all, what happens between those episodes? And if you don't know what happens between those episodes, then the question becomes, is there really a such thing as a linear narrative pertaining to time travel or picaresque?
Brilliant question, because what is inside that black space in between is not the absence of anything, but in fact a suppression of something. The power of the cut in Stanley Kubrick's film 2001 Space Odyssey, when that ape man throws away the bone, and within that cut, suddenly the bone transforms into a stellar intergalactic ship. Every time I look at it, I almost just would like to cry, because the whole terrestrial history of humanity, from the time we evolved from the ape to the time that we become this airborne intergalactic creature that we will be in so many years, maybe, that whole history of humanity, all the Shakespeares and the Da Vinci's and all the great inventions we have were totally suppressed. So this cut is so significant, so powerful. Eisenstein talked about it in the 20s, and look exactly where he brought cinema. That was the first great moment of cinematic history, and also of criticism, when suddenly he discovered the potency of a cut. So your question is, where is the narrative?
Well, if if we don't necessarily know what is in that fade to black cut, then is there really, you know, applying to your work being time travel, is there really a such thing as a linear narrative?
I am still of the old school, and I bow to Hassan here for bringing us into another topographic visual world. I still insisted on a narrative, and that's why, sir, your progression of questions is unbelievable. We start with our master Shifei here talking about a concrete space and time. I cut time, and then suddenly he just explodes time and has
and you know, explosion around arrows like me.
I shouldn't do that. Shouldn't do that. But you're quite right. I mean, and the other person who should answer this should really be Hassan. So you know, this whole idea of narrative, I still insisted on it. My authorial power is still very strong. I am trying to explore the world that Hassan is right now, but it's brought about by a new technology. And this is the digital non-linear. See, the very word non-linear editing, you know, that's his generation now. I'm trying to get there. I'm doing a 10-hour documentary series. See, I only make serials, all right? A 10-hour documentary series of what happened during 100 years of cinema in the Philippines. And of course, I appear as my own narrator. I'm the historian, all right? But the thing is, I still insist on that narrative to be there. As I dash from 100 years ago to the present, who knows, I will, may I use the word again, Hassan, explode the moment I get on the 10th hour, wherein I now encounter the digital age. And I think that's where I'm gonna pull off the lead and then, you know, go into a chaotic, I don't know if you, but there is design, however. In the absence of narrative, isn't there design? So I challenge you with that.
Thank you.
Other questions? Thank you.
I have a question to Hassan.
Please, yeah.
All right, we started off, Hassan. You just provoked me, you know. No, but isn't there a question of the question of selectivity and the question of presenting only what you want to present? The choice of the images of how do we know that that was an authentic image and not like, for example, this one. If you insist that this was, you say it's Moscow, it could have been in Ala Moana.
No, it's Moscow.
Yeah, you insist, but your word against mine. Is the picture an evidence of a presence?
Yes.
You insist on that, we don't.
Okay.
Because you're the author,
Sure.
you're the one making your narrative, we don't.
Sure. So if I want to follow up on that, a lot of the strategy in working on this work is telling you everything and telling you absolutely nothing simultaneously.
Yeah.
So it's camouflage. You know, we're in an era where everything is archived, everything is tracked, every little motion that you make is recorded. And more importantly, there's no reason to delete anything. There's no need to delete. It's not that, you know, hard drive, it's not that you only have 2 megs of hard drive space in your emails. I mean, I don't even delete my spam. Gmail just kind of does something with it. I don't know what it does. I don't care what it does. I don't need to even think about that. But, you know, we've all had this experience when you punch in something and then something pops up and you're like, oh, I totally forgot about this. And you're, so it's almost this externalized memory. Now, if you think about it, so let's use a real pragmatic example of externalized memory. How many phone numbers did you remember? How many phone numbers do you know right now, off the top of your head?
What?
1? Yeah. How many did you know 10 years ago? Everybody's. Exactly. Exactly. Why? Because now we have this device that we've taken that what used to be in our memory and now it's externalized. And that's now become an extension of our body. That device is now an extension of our body. That's where our memory of our phone numbers are kept. And I don't even need to know what phone numbers are. I can just look at the name and just touch their name and it calls. Half the time I'm not even calling people. I mean, it doesn't even matter anymore. So it's completely changed this. Okay, so we've established that. The other thing is, so is there a reason for me to ever delete someone off my contacts? I mean, you know, some people when they break up with you, they actually delete them.
Right.
But why? Is it because your phone can only remember 30 people? No, it's infinite. I mean, might as well be infinite, really, in a lot of cases. Okay, so we know that we don't have a need to delete. We know that we have external, but what does that mean to when you no longer ever have a need to delete? And does that mean that we have reached a point in culture where we no longer have a need to forget? And this is a huge shift because for thousands and thousands and thousands of years, we've had these, you know, like mourning, like, you know, once you pass that process of grieving, that process of loss, that process of forgetting. This is something that we've dealt with as humans for as long as we've been around. But when that becomes permanent, that state of never having to need to forget, that changes, there's a huge upheaval that takes place. Now, here's where it gets really interesting in terms of data. Now, I'm noticing a lot of phones and a lot of iPhones. Take your iPhones out. I want to do an exercise with you. Let's do your phones. If you have an Android or if you're not near, just peek your shoulder over someone that's with it. Okay, so let's go to your settings. Let's go to your settings. Okay, are you on your settings? Go down to, where's that, privacy? Okay, your privacy, right? Now, go to location services. Okay? You see your location services? Scroll down, way, 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 way down to the bottom. You're going to see system services. Go in it. Okay, now you're in your system services, right?
Yeah.
You following me so far? Keep going down, keep going down. Go towards the bottom, there's a thing called frequent locations. Go in it. What do you see? Go into each of those. So everything you've done, everywhere you've been, every step you've taken is there. So what does that actually mean? So really, what it comes down to is everything that we do with the phone. So every one of these images has that metadata behind it.
There you are.
So every single thing. So it's no longer about the physical image. It's about the act of taking the image. So what you're really seeing is everything is now, well, it's a number. It's a number. And it's about cross-referencing this number with that number with that number. So now, you know, when you take your picture, if you can download an EXIF reader, which is EXIF, some of you might be familiar with this from photography, but when you look at your photo that's taken from an EXIF, not only you see your latitude and longitude, we know about that because that's how you know, Instagram knows, hey, do you want to tag this location? But it also knows what your altitude of that phone was. The photograph from the ground level looks very different from the 20th floor. Ooh. Then, what angle was this phone pointed at? Remember, you have a compass on your phone. So it knows what rotation it was. Is this the east wall of your bedroom, or is it this wall? It knows. And then, if you go to your health app, it shows every single step you've taken at what second. So you cross-reference this with that, with that, with that, and those seemingly random images can only be in very, 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 very specific places and nowhere else. And so it's really no longer about the image, but it's about the data that's created of the image from behind, the part we'd never see, the invisible part. And you know, we're having this conversation in the car over here. You know, in this world of photography today, where the vast majority of images are machines taking pictures for other machines that other machines process that humans will never see. What does that mean today when we're working with cameras and we're working with digital capture as storytelling and narratives? Where does that leave us? So, yeah.
I really still have problems of the insistence of the machine in our human life, because what if I give it to somebody and it becomes an avatar of my presence?
Yeah.
Which means, you know, I am in Tacoma, but he will be in Honolulu. Yeah. So I give that machine to you because the machine will not validate the person who is using it, but only can give you this cold information of where you are. So I can have an avatar go to the moon and say he was in the moon at the time that maybe, you know, you're dating somebody or killing somebody.
But you know what? Here's where it gets really interesting, because well, first, I mean, how often do you actually don't have your phone? I mean, you always have it on you at times. And if you don't, you start freaking out and you start like, it's like, where's my phone? I mean, how many of you sleep with an arm's reach of your phone? Don't lie. You can be honest.
Okay, it's embarrassing, but...
It's embarrassing, but we all do it. But here's the other thing. So now, every now and then you see those weird like black and white text things that pop up. It'll just say like Safeway $23.35. So not only that I'm providing you an image of a map of where I am, that's my bank records. My bank records are public, by the way. So now the bank is verifying that yes, indeed, on this date, I spent this much at this location. So if this database and this, so what gets really interesting is we were always suspicious of digital images. I think all of us, it's like, because we've all opened up Photoshop and we've all doctored up images. But in order to doctor up, say, 40, 50, or 80,000 images that's in this database right now, it will take more time than time exists to recreate that. And that's where it gets interesting, because it creates that shift where it's no longer about time. And I think this is something for us to keep in mind in terms of creating narratives and creative structures and creating this type of stories. What happens when, in order to fabricate the story, it takes more time than time exists? So it has to be true. The most suspect of all images, this digital image taken by a phone, which we know can be screwed around with, that becomes the most authentic image. It's kind of, and again, it's that counterintuitive. It's that circumnavigation. You go one direction and you actually end up in the other with it. Sorry, I'm rambling over here.
Yes, you can.
Let me say something. 像我这样的老一代人，特别是中国的老一代，这一辈子有2个大的事件经历过。
I belong to the older generation, and in my generation, there are 2 major events happened.
最近这个数字技术的变化就是一个最大的事情。
The digital technology is the biggest change.
今天到你们这里看到你们这个 Digital Museum， 我看到很多过去的胶片的移植的设备，你们保存的特别丰富。
You guys kept a very good record of the past films, past records.
哈森他的这个实验也使我大开眼界。
Hassan's experiment opened my horizon today.
其实在另外一个事件，实际就是76年中国的文化革命结束，中国打开了大门，我可以出来旅行了。
The second event is China opened their market in the end of 1976. That's marked the end of Cultural Revolution. So that allowed me to come out to the foreign countries to travel.
刚才在你们的前头看到那个电影荧幕上在放的那个歌猫王的形象 ，Presley。
Presley, the cat, the king cat.
大家，我是60年代在中国学电影的，但是在我82、86年第一次到84年啊，第一次到美国的时候，我突然发现有3个明星我从来没看过。
I was born in 1960 and
No, boring. I studied cinema in 60s.
60. Oh, studies. Oh, sorry. He studied cinema in 1960. I thought he was born in 1960. I'm not a professional translator. But he came to America in 1984, the first time to America, and he found 3 celebrities here that he has never seen before.
One is Marilyn Monroe.
Marilyn Monroe.
James Dean. James Dean, you know?
James
you know?
I know Jeremy Lin.
Third one is Presley. 就是
Eversley.
我是学电影的，但是我不知道这2个明星，我也没看过他们的电影。
I never saw their movies before.
因为当时我们是在那样一个教育隔绝的。
Yeah, in the old Chinese, they isolate us from the Western culture.
我们中国有个老话，一个人必须要行万里路，读万卷书，你才能学到东西。
The Chinese old proverb said that you have to travel far to gain knowledge.
所以我就是文化革命后，我在全世界一走，我学到了很多东西，我才能拍出好的电影来。
After Cultural Revolution, I was able to travel around the country, around the globe, so that I can film the good films with rich culture.
那么现在有了这个 数字技术，像这个电脑，我们也可以一下子。中国Facebook 是禁止的，但是我们有中国的 Facebook， 就是微信，我们也是天天都可以联系了。
In China, Facebook was forbidden, but in China we have a Chinese version of Facebook, which is WeChat, so that we can use WeChat to connect with each other.
所以我觉得就是一个人像我们搞艺术家，就更应该要多去旅行，多去看，然后要运用新的东西，就能发现新的，搞出新的作品来。
As a new artist, you can just like them to travel around so that you can explore new things and create new stuff.
现在我在中国主要做的事还是教书，同时我是希望年轻人要看经典的电影。这100多年来，全世界拍了很多经典的电影，你要去看，因为那些东西已经消失了，只有在电影里才能看到。
Right now, I'm mainly teaching in China, but I recommend young kids like you guys to watch the classical films in the past 100 years because those things were already extinct in the real life, but you can find them through the movies.
Yeah, 就是读万卷书，也包括看万部经典电影，几千部经典电影，你们会学到很多东西。
Traveling far away also includes you watching a lot of movies that can give you a lot of good insights.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Did we have other questions from the group? Yes, please.
Yeah, I actually have a question for the professor from China.
Yes.
So, you say you travel around the world and see a lot of things, and you go back to China and make your own film. And the 2 films I saw you did today is almost like to tell a story about Chinese story. So I just want to know how you could make your story, because it's kind of like Chinese story, international, or is it any difference? You just made your film to Chinese people, or yeah, kind of like that.
Yeah. 这个就是因为现在全世界最近100年来，英语成为了世界语。美国它太强大，好莱坞电影占领了多数的市场。
In the recent years, English became the prevailing language, and Hollywood movies dominating the world.
但是世界事物会发展的，我认为50年后、100年后，说不定中文会成世界第一语。
Okay, so he predict that after 50 years or 100 years, maybe Chinese became the worldly language.
因为我最近发现 Facebook 的那个创建人叫扎什么克
，Mark Zuckerberg。
他在中国做了一次中文的演讲，把我吓一跳，他竟然会说中文。
Wow, the CEO of Facebook went to China and made a speech in Chinese, which shocked her.
所以现在我们要排有13亿中国观众喜欢看的中国电影就不错了。你现在想让中国电影让全世界看，还不太可能，以后有机会的。
It's even impossible to please a 1.4 billion population in China, so it's hardly impossible, let alone the whole world.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good question. Thank you. Other thoughts, folks? Any other questions? Yes. Is Black Snow the film that's screening at the other campus?
Yeah, today.
Today is at UH Manoa?
是在那个UH 是在哪个学校？是
在那个 program.
Do you have a program?
Well,
Yeah.
that's a good. You know what I'll do is when we're wrapped up, I'll make sure I get all of you schedule so you can check it out. Hopefully, if it's going on right away.
主校区。
The program here today.
在主校区。
Yeah, thank you. We'll be sure.
He said it's in Manoa.
It's up Manoa.
Tomorrow I have another 2 films, Mongolia, Taiwan, the Son of Tibet. Tomorrow. Today 3.
Okay, so Black Snow screening later today at UH Manoa, and then Mongolian Tale, your most recent film, right? No, that's not your most recent. Song of Tibet.
The Son of Tibet.
That's the most recent, but Mongolian Tale, and what was the other one? I'm sorry.
This 2 films is showing tomorrow.
That's tomorrow. So 2 others tomorrow at UH Manoa, and so I'll make sure you all have that information if you'd like to go. That would be great. Thank you. there, anybody else have a comment or question? We have just a little bit of time left. Yeah,
Well, talking about what we were talking about before as far as the narrative and imagery, historically, literature and the narrative has been very finite. If a novel has 500,000 words, it'll only have 500,000 words.
Yep.
But now we're looking at imagery, whether you're watching a film or looking at a photograph or read photographs. And we know that there's a binary code of many, many numbers and data and metadata that's going into that image to create that image. And so now, are we in a time where a narrative that used to be finite has now become infinite because you can apply as much data and or metadata to just one still image as you can without even watching the whole film, just looking at the still photograph. Is that, yes, I guess that question would be for
You, Hassan.
You.
for Hassan.
Okay.
Is that
Hassan.
what
Well, I think any of us can because we all deal with this. We've all deal with this transition. Kind of interestingly enough, we have this concept. We use the term digital native a lot, but we never actually use the term digital immigrant, which we all have had to migrate to a digital world in a sense. So I think in a sense, if you think about it, maybe a way to frame this is to step back a little and look at the concept of physicality and virtuality, or material and dematerial. And if you think about it, so let's talk commerce. What's like the biggest store you could think of? What's the biggest store out there that you've been to that you can imagine? Any store, yeah. Walmart, okay. How many products does Walmart have? It seems like a lot, right? But say Walmart wants to add a new product. They have to take away one off their shelf to make room for another one. So even what seems like this insanely large marketplace, or you can take the biggest library in the world. In order to add one to that shelf, one has to be removed from that shelf. That's in the concept of physicality. Amazon, if they want to add another product, they just add one. There's no physical space that needs to be taken out. So in the same way, I'm thinking about, this is what you're thinking about in ideas. If we think of the ideas as the virtual or the immaterial, in order to add a new idea, you don't need to get rid of an existing one. And I think this is a very important concept in this digital trend that we're seeing. This idea of the infinite addition, or a lot of technologies that talk about this is the long tail. So it's no longer just a single handful of immediate things, but now it's this really large number of options. I think if you want to talk very pragmatically about, say, television production, there was a time where you had 3 gatekeepers between the 3 networks, and you had 22 minutes or 44 minutes, and news had to be at this time, and sitcoms were at this time, and daytime dramas were at this time, and evening news was this, late night was this. So you really only had like 3 hours out of the entire day with 3 gatekeepers that kept you, and you had to conform to that structure. Now, if your work needs to be 12 minutes, it's 12 minutes. And it's on YouTube doesn't care whether it's 120 hours or if it's 12 seconds. And your audience is very specific. So I think this is a shift that we're seeing. And we're also another huge shift that's taking place in this material-immaterial shift. Or if you want to talk about this, the narrative or the digital narrative versus the analog narrative, if you want to put it in that way. I think a huge shift that's taking place is the number of participants. In the past, it was often a one-way street. A handful of producers, lots of consumers. Now, I mean, you see something, you can immediately create a response video on YouTube. Or you read an article and say, historically, say you would read a newspaper article. If you were to write a letter to the editor, maybe they will publish it the following week or something. Now, there's comment sections are longer than the articles themselves. So it's become this two-way street. And I think the fact that the consumers, or the historically what were consumers, are now producing just as much as the producers, I think is a really important change in cultural production.
I have a problem with your problem because the assumption that you have is that the narrative, as the technology begins to migrate now from the analog to the digital, that you think that that narrative, you assume that that narrative is not going to be affected. It will change. This is the whole point. In fact, what is so revolutionary about what is being discussed here is that there is going to be a migration as well of the producer of meaning. The authorship will be besieged. This is a breathtaking time that we are living in, so that Hassan, as I feel, by showing us that multitude and multiple images there, do you really think that meaning alone is produced by the producer or the author of those images? He cannot deny us that the narrative is the one that we create based on his images. He is no longer the autonomous sovereign maker of meanings as it was in the analog stage. Where will narrativity lie in the age of digital technology and communication? This is going to be very profound. So that what we call as consumer, and this is exactly the debate that Hassan and I were having in the car, that there is a lot of shifts that are going to happen, and there is a parallax now, a huge parallax that will have to happen in the way we look at time. Because are we going to use the lens of the digital age and its power for multiple perspectives in looking at a 19th century novel? We have to make a lot of adjustments. This is a big epistemological problem and has a lot of pedagogical implication. So this is huge. The shift is unbelievable, because and I end it just by saying, who will be the maker of that meaning if meaning were to mean narrative? So the assumption there and the awakening that comes out from the problem that you pose, which is very significant again, is that how will the narrative be in the age of digital communication? Fantastic.
Yeah, thank you for that question. It's really, really thought-provoking.
So we're moving toward the end of our time, but we still have a couple moments for other questions or comments. If anybody would like to pose another question.
That's a great question.
It's a good one. Yeah, don't be shy about it. You know, I mean,
Yeah.
literally ask anything. I mean, nothing's off limits.
So, anybody? Yes, thanks.
What if you have pets?
I don't.
You know, my cat was sort of he was a star on Facebook for a while. Unfortunately, he passed away after 20 years. But I feel like cats invented the internet. And there's some. No, but I think this is interesting because we talk about actually. Can we pull up? Speaking of pets, can we pull up a really cool website? And this there is relevance to this, and it kind of illustrates a little of this project, but in a different way. Let's go ahead and pull up a website called iknowwhereyourcatlives.com. It's actually there we go. Let's go to this one. Because cats invented the internet, so we can have photos of cats and cat videos everywhere. We know that. Oh, actually, this is the wiki search. Let's go back to the actual art. It's just iknowwhereyourcatlives.com. All right, so check this out. Well, actually, okay, this is a little strange because, okay, hold on a bit. Let me explain this. Okay, just hit random cat again, and then I'll get back to this in a second. Random cat, just at that blue button. Yep, yeah. There's a reason why this doesn't work in Brazil. Okay, well, maybe we have, it's still stuck in, okay, no, we're in Thailand. Oh, somebody removed this. Let's try one more time. Let's reload it. Hit another random cat. There we go, cat. Timber Grove Road. Can you zoom out a little bit on the little plus minus on the right? It's down there. Yeah. So where is this? Oh, Owings Mill Road. So this is like near my house. Keep going down, keep going out, keep going out. And then you can see all these. So every time you're posting those cat videos or the cat things, so if we know where this cat lives, we can presume where the cat's owner lives. So it really challenges questions of privacy. The reason it doesn't work in Brazil is because cat, gato or gata in Portuguese, or in Brazilian Portuguese also means like sexy. Or good looking. So yeah. So actually, yeah, we can go into each of these cats. I mean, any particular cat you want to see? So anyway, so speaking of pets, I think this is actually a really interesting project. So you can just hit random cat and just keep taking to the random cats.
What's behind that question?
Yeah. Dogs? No, my cat did not like dogs. No. There's cat people and there's dog people.
I think one thing that we're seeing is that the creative scholarly life, that the pets can be a casualty of the creative scholarly life. We appreciate you sacrificing the companionship of pets for our benefit.
Well, he was good. 20 years. All right. Anyway.
Interesting site.
Cool. Any other questions? Yeah.
Sorry, I have just a question on your website, Hassan.
Mhm.
The story behind your website
Yeah.
is kind of, surprising, but not really to us because we hear so much
Yeah.
about it. But is it, would you say that the narrative, because in a way there is a lack of,
Yes.
with the narrative or the creation of you kind of mocking the FBI?
No, not at all. No, I'm a very cooperative guy. I like them. I like to help out. No, sorry. You were saying.
That's kind of just
Okay.
because hearing the story and making the connection to the
Yeah.
website, I laugh at it.
Mhm.
Like, this
Oh,
is
yeah,
the
yeah.
pictures of where he's using the bathroom.
I know,
Taking it to the nth degree.
Yeah.
It's-
Because the other option is actually quite frightening, and it's really depressing, the other side of it. So in that circumnavigation, I kind of have to present it in this way, because the other option just is not, that's not very happy cheery. But having said that, I think there's an interesting thing that's taking place is the idea of camouflage, the idea of digital camouflage. It's hiding in plain sight. I mean, there's a lot of information there that's meaningful, but good luck filtering through it. By the time you've gotten through it, it becomes noise. And I think in our new digital lives, where so much of our lives are digitally mediated, digitally tracked, digitally archived, that anonymity is going to become much more important, and disconnecting is not an option. One of the things, it's like, when you send a text out and you see someone says read, but then you're like, how come you haven't responded yet? Or there's no reason why not to answer a phone call. Why are you not answering my phone call? And just the fact that you don't do that, it's already goes into a mode of, you're already guilty of something. So disconnecting, and we're not going to just give up our phones or any other, of our digital lives just because we're being tracked with it. So I think one of the things that we're going to do is we're going to need to figure out how to blur into that, and how to become anonymous in that. And I've figured, for example, if the first thing you pull up and someone's name and comes up and it's not exactly the most flattering thing. Rick Santorum had this problem. So what do you do? What do you do when the first thing that pops up? You can't tell, hey, Google, this is making me look bad. I need you to delete. They're not going to do this. But you can bury it to page 35. But in order to bury it to page 35, you need 34 pages of information. And you'd much rather be in control over that rather than have someone else. So I think what it really comes down to is when we create our own stories, when we tell our own stories, you want to be responsible for it. Because when someone else does it, it's inevitably going to be wrong. And it will be inaccurate. So when you're in control, you have this position of power and this position of authority to tell the story as how you want your story to be told. I think that's the important part in this. And I think when you generate 34 pages of your own material that you have control over, it's a much more accurate perspective than that one or two things that someone else might throw out. And even when you think you're not being, even though you may not share anything, someone else might share it. I mean, we've all had this thing. It's like, I don't want that photo, but then it gets tagged by somebody else anyway. It's things like that. So, another example, another very pragmatic example, like, those in Facebook, if you have that friend that only has 5 photos, you've looked at all 5 of them. If they have 500, after a while, you've kind of given up. So I'm going to leave it at that. Thank you. Thank you for that great question. Thank you.